Hi, and welcome to this episode of John's Model Kit Review. In today's fun classic model kit review video, we'll be looking at Tamiya's 1/48 scale F1M2 Pete. This is kit number MA-111. This kit was originally released in 1967. It is technically a 1/50th scale aircraft. At the time of its introduction, Tamiya had a whole line of 1/50th scale aircraft. Many of the kits in this line have been reboxed as 1/48 scale aircraft. I'm sure some of you out there may be asking, with the newer Hasegawa F1M2 currently available, why in the world would somebody waste time on this ancient kit? I think that's a very fair question, and to be honest, if you're looking to build the definitive kit of the F1M2 in 1/48 scale, I would highly recommend the Hasegawa product. I build a wide range of kits, and I think it's a really fun challenge to take a classic kit like this and try to turn it out in such a fashion that it can sit next to a much newer kit without looking out of place. This kit is very much a product of the time period in which it was released. The surface detailing is a mix of raised panel lines and recessed panel lines, and there are lots and lots of raised rivets on the exterior of this kit, and that fact alone may deter some people from building it, but I'm honestly quite pleased with the way that this kit turned out. And so I'll go over some of the modifications I made to it and some of the subtle upgrades that I did over the course of building it. In this review, we'll take a look at the kit instructions and we'll go through the construction steps and talk about any problems to watch out for or any modifications that I made. I'll also talk a little bit about the weathering techniques that I used on this build, and really the weathering techniques and the finishing techniques that you use on a build can really elevate a classic kit to a much higher level than most people might think possible. A brief history of the F1M Pete. The Mitsubishi F1M was classified as an observation seaplane and used by the Imperial Japanese Navy, which gave it the designation Navy Type 0. It was a float plane with a biplane configuration. It had a crew of 2. Maximum speed on the F1M was 230 miles an hour. It had a 670-mile range, and it was powered by an 875 horsepower radial engine. Armament on the F1M consisted of 3 7mm or 30 caliber machine guns. 2 of these were forward firing, and there was 1 rearward facing on a flexible mount for the observer. The F1M could also carry 2 60-kilogram or 132-pound bombs. The F1M was a versatile platform, and it was used for gunnery spotting, convoy escort. It was used as a light bomber. It was used in anti-submarine patrol, maritime patrol, rescue, transport, and even as a local defense fighter in certain circumstances. 940 of the F1M2 aircraft were produced prior to the end of World War II. Looking at the instructions, in step 1, we are gluing the wing halves together. I didn't have any issues here, but one thing I did do was take the wings and I lightly sanded the tops and bottoms of the wings, and that reduced the prominent raised riveting to a more realistic level. There's a lot going on in step 2. We are assembling the interior for the kit, and we are closing the fuselage halves around that. We're also building the engine cowl and the prop. This kit was originally released with the option of building it in a motorized configuration. The pilot figures that were included with this kit were very basic, and so I have replaced those with much nicer pilot figures that I have sourced from later Tamiya kits. From the research that I've done, I'm pretty sure that the interior color for the fuselage is an interior green, very similar in shade to a US interior green. One modification that I made to the engine cowl was to remove the upper air scoop because I wanted to finish this plane as an early version of the F1M, and the earlier versions did not have the air intake. So I cut that off and I filled the hole and I sanded things smooth on the top of the engine cowl. Another addition that I made to this kit was replacing the prop spinner, and I used a prop spinner from a 1/48 scale Hasegawa Mitsubishi Zero to replace the kit part. In step 3, we're attaching the wings to the fuselage and the clear parts to the fuselage, and we're also attaching the engine to the fuselage. The fit of the lower wings to the fuselage was not stellar, but I got a reasonable fit on those. It's kind of the same story with the tail planes, and I'm happy with the end result. Due to the small opening in the engine cowl, there's not a whole lot visible of the engine, and so I didn't spend a whole lot of time detailing this out, but you can see what's visible through the engine cowl in this photo. In step 4, we're building the floats for the aircraft, and we're attaching those to the fuselage. It also has you attaching these small bombs at this point. I found that during this step of construction, I needed a lot of liquid glue to get those gaps filled where the floats attached to the aircraft. In step 5, we're building the beaching dolly. This went together pretty well, but there were a couple of sink marks that I had to fill on part 49. In step 6, we're attaching the upper wing to the fuselage. I had the same issue with the struts and the holes that they kind of plug into, both on the fuselage and on the upper wing. There were gaps around those, and so I spent a significant amount of time filling those gaps with liquid cement and then letting it dry and then doing that again and repeating that process until I had a smooth join between the struts and the wings and the fuselage. In step 7, we're adding some rigging to the aircraft between the upper and lower wings. I didn't do this step simply because I find rigging to be a real pain to do, and not only that, I don't think it holds up well over time, and it makes the model very difficult to dust and to keep nice. The final addition that I made to this kit was to replace the very simple rearward-facing rear machine gun with a more detailed machine gun. To be honest, I used a leftover .30 caliber machine gun from a Sherman tank build, and I added the ammo can on top of that from a Nichimo Kate bomber aircraft. I know it's not 100% accurate, but it certainly looks better than the kit supplied part. Once I had the airframe built up, I went ahead and painted the kit. I mixed my own shade for the exterior color, and I used RLM 84 from Polyscale's line, and I mixed that with a few drops of brown. I think the resulting color is a good match for the Imperial Japanese Navy gray. Once the airframe was painted, it was time to go back and do some weathering to the kit, and I used pastels to highlight all of the structural detail and the rivet detail. I applied these with a closely cropped paintbrush, and once they were applied, I went back and used a kneadable eraser to erase most of what you can see, and so it leaves a very subtle weathering effect. Because this is a biplane and because this is a float plane, it took about twice as long as it would normally take me for a single engine fighter, simply because of the amount of surface area that I had to cover with the pastels. Once the pastel weathering was completed, I sealed those with an airbrush layer of future floor polish. That also served as a gloss coat in preparation for the decals. Looking at the decals that came with the kit, there are marking options for 6 different aircraft included. Unfortunately, the decals that came with the kit had aged out. They were yellowed and very brittle. I did try to use 1 or 2 of them, but they cracked almost immediately and were not usable. Fortunately, I save all of the decals that I don't use on other kits, and I was able to use quite a few Hasegawa 0 decals on this one, and I'm very happy with the end result. Once the decals were completed, I used an acrylic pen wash, and I added a little bit more detail behind the front engine cowling. I also added a little bit of oil staining around the engine compartment area. After the decals were dry, I airbrushed a final coat of satin clear over the model, and then I attached all the final bits and did my final touch-ups and detail painting. In conclusion, well, I am super happy with the way this kit turned out. This was a really fun project. I love taking an older kit and improving it and finishing it in such a way that it can sit proudly on the shelf next to much newer kits and not look out of place. By applying some basic modeling skills and using some leftover parts that I had from other builds, I was able to achieve a nice result from this classic kit. Finally, I think that improving a classic kit really elevates your skills as a modeler. These are an inexpensive template for practicing new weathering techniques and new model making techniques. Well, I'd love to know what you guys think. If any of you out there have built Tamiya's F1M2 Pete, please feel free to comment in the comment section below. As always, I hope you found this video entertaining and informative, and until next time, model on.